Fala galera, esse é o PodBrabos Podcast e nesse podcast nós vamos falar de tudo que você imaginar sobre expressão facial emocional, sobre o comportamento humano, sobre linguagem corporal, sobre detecção de mentira, sobre análise de interrogatório, técnicas e métodos de interrogatório, tudo que você imaginar nesse sentido, nesse assunto. Eu sou Marcelo Boller, sou monitor do Lab e Fact Certified Coder e membro do PodBrabos Podcast. Fala, Hyuri. Manda brava aí, pô.
Salve, salve, rapaziada. Então, meu nome é Hyuri Correia, sou graduando em Psicologia, Fact Certified Coder, monitor do Lab e, assim, também faço parte aqui do PodBrabos, o podcast mais novo e mais brabo desse Brasil. Fala aí, Renatão.
E aí, pessoal, aqui é Renato Braga, quase um antropólogo, também Fact Coder e faço parte do PodBrabos Brasil.
Estamos aqui com Erika Rosenberg, ela que é PhD, ela é autor sênior do FACS e é a proteger a pupila do Ekman, o Ekman em pessoa, e ela é uma das principais responsáveis também pela revisão do FACS e para essa nova versão. So, hello, Erika.
Hello, nice to see you. Thank you for inviting me.
Nice to see you too.
So, let's talk about introduce yourself, Erika. For people that don't know you, or it's
more about
open
your work.
door. You in Brazil, so talk about yourself.
Okay, I'm here, I guess, because of your interest in FACS, the facial action coding system, which I've been working with since 1988, before most of you were born, I guess, or maybe
Sure.
when I was a graduate student coming into Paul Ekman's laboratory in 1988. That's when I first started learning FACS. So I've been working with facial expression measurement since then. I originally got interested in it because of my interest in emotions and health. And I was, personally, as a lot of people, I had experienced connection between how my moods and what I stress and things like that, and changes in my body. So that's what brought me into emotion research originally. And I'm going to pause because I know you're translating. Yeah.
No, we'll do a post production, and we'll put subtitles and etc.
Okay, good. Okay, so I teach a lot internationally, so I know that we have to work in small bits, but very good. So we don't have to do that right now.
Yeah.
So that's
Sure.
Yeah. So I've been working. That's what opened the door for me in my own research in psychology, in terms of wanting to take something like emotion and be able to measure it, which is so difficult. And I was very fortunate when I came to the University of California in San Francisco to study health psychology, that my first year there, I didn't even meet Paul Ekman until the end of it. I didn't go there to study with Paul Ekman, but he came into our graduate seminar class at the end of our first year, and I had been struggling with how to measure stress, how to measure emotion, and this man walks in and talks about how he's taken something so personal and subjective as emotion and made it observable from the outside. It just kind of blew my mind, and that's when I started working with him, and I had no idea what I was entering into, right? This whole world of facial expression. So I've been working with that for years, in research, in my own academic studies and teaching, and I guess it was about 2004 where I left being a full-time professor and started my own business with a lot of facial expression training and consulting. And so prior to that time, I'd been teaching. When I was working with FACS in my laboratory, I would teach my graduate students, but it was around 2004 that I started offering the workshops, because there were so many people, mainly in academia at that time, who wanted to use facial action coding, but didn't have the time or discipline really to learn it on your own, because the FACS manual, which is a training manual and a user's manual, it's not just for training, as you know. And when that was designed to be self-instructional, but as you may also know, it's very dense with words. It's very difficult to follow, and there's a lot of detail in there that you don't always need in the beginning when you're first learning, and it comes in when you start coding. So I found, actually it was in June of 2004 that I taught my first workshop. and my first 5-day workshop, and it's kind of grown from there. So that's, I mean, I've done all kinds of, we could get into it more. I don't want to do this in the introduction, but all these different applications of facts, both in research science and in industry, digital arts, medicine, forensics.
Great.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm also a mother of 2 grown sons. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I play guitar. I like to see live music. I also love to cook. And another whole branch of my life and work is involved with meditation. I've been a meditation teacher and practitioner well, I started practicing in graduate school, actually, and started teaching meditation about 20 years ago, 22 years ago. Yeah, yeah. So that's a big part of my life, too. And sometimes they come together. And, in the last several years, there have been a number of places where the academic, emotion side and the compassion meditation side have come together in terms of research and various programs I've been involved with. So that's a long answer to who I am. And yeah,
That's amazing.
Oh,
That's so
sure.
amazing. I play guitar too. So I would like to see you playing guitar.
not really. I used to be in a band a long time ago. Now it's
Oh
just
my God.
fun. When I come to Brazil,
Sure. You're surely invited.
once we're out of this pandemic, then I'd love to come. Anyway,
Sure.
yeah. So
So very interesting, Erica. We here from Brazil are very interested in all these subjects like behavior and facial expression and all Ekman's work and facts. We sure have lots of followers that are interested in getting the certification, etc., etc.
Mhm.
And can you tell us more about how have you already applied facts? You briefly mentioned a few topics, a few areas. If you can expand a little more,
a little more detail.
we'll love it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I started working with facts pretty much right away when I came to Paul Ekman's lab. I mean, I had to learn it on my own. He handed me a binder and a VHS video cassette, and he said, "Learn this."
Whoa.
And I learned it. And fortunately, he and Wally Friesen were both in the labs. So when I had questions, there were the creators of the
You
program.
ask
Yeah, I had
Ekman
this
himself in person.
Yeah.
Oh my
But
gosh.
it was very hands off. I mean, I had to learn it from the manual. I didn't learn it he didn't sit and teach us.
Sure.
And when I first came to the lab in 1988, it was just me. And then within a year or so, some postdoctoral fellows came in. And so I had some colleagues there. But, my first use with facts was in research and psychology. I did several projects. My dissertation was probably it was the first time in health psychology research that someone had brought detailed facial expression measurement into a major research area. The work on heart disease. Actually, there had been one study that Ekman, Friesen, Chesney, Black, and a few others had done on people with type A behavior. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that notion of type A people. This is from a 20th century notion, but it referred to what we would call a coronary prone behavior pattern, people who were hostile and competitive and time urgent, and that seemed to have a profile that led people to be more likely to have a heart disease and die from it. And that notion is in our popular culture still. But I did my dissertation in the mid 1990s on anger and heart disease. I was very interested in trying to pinpoint what emotions seem to trigger cardiac events in people. And there had been a number of studies looking at this disease manifestation called transient myocardial ischemia. I will type that. Myocardial ischemia. It's in the chat field right now. That this is something, what that means, myocardial, the heart, ischemia is any situation in which there's an insufficient blood supply to the heart. You know, if you get a big ischemic event in the heart, you have a heart attack. If you have one up in one of the coronary arteries, you can get or in other vessels in the brain, you can get a stroke. Right. So people with heart disease can have these transient, meaning they come and go, ischemic events in the heart, often that they do not feel, you know, but if they're measured with ambulatory, you know, if they're measured with recording equipment, you can see these little blips where their heart is not getting enough oxygen. And it turns out that stress will create more of these, and that people who are walking around with heart disease, stress-related ischemic events can predict whether they have a serious cardiac event or even die from it. So there'd been a lot of research on mental stress, and there had also been this work on hostility, but I was curious as to whether anger might be the thing, given all that work on hostility that happened during that time. No one had looked at the emotions behind these, you know, correlated with these ischemic events. And in this big part of a big project that was collaborative with researchers at Duke Medical Center in North Carolina, James Blumenthal was the major person there. So it was a collaborative grant that we were working on at the time. I was able to get access to these really rich data where we had mostly men, unfortunately, a few women, this was reflecting the times, who were heart disease patients, and they were getting their heart monitored in real time. So there were motion images of their heart being taken and other measures of how well the heart was pumping blood to the body. That was all happening, and we had video of them during an interview, actually the type A structured interview, which was an interview designed to call forth patterns of, you know, examples of this behavior pattern I mentioned, where, you know, to see how competitive or hostile people could be. And during this portion, when they were talking about some of these emotions, we collected the heart images and we collected video. And then I did the coding. This was my dissertation part of what emotions seem to be happening when they have these ischemic events and these transient myocardial ischemic events. I know that's a long word. It might be hard. Probably won't translate into anything but that. But the point being, when people experience these, they were often silent, meaning they didn't feel it. It's not like they had pain, right? So they're very tiny little events that you could measure with electrical recording equipment, but you didn't feel. So it's not like they were in pain and the emotions we see on their face are from their from their pain. It was just whatever emotions they were going through. And I found, and this paper was published, well, there were two papers published from this project. That the one with all the heart disease data came out in 2001 in Emotions, but during these ischemic events, they were more likely to be showing anger expressions than other negative emotions. So anger expressions seem to be predictive of these ischemic events. And those heart disease patients who didn't express the anger didn't have as many. And then the other thing that was really fascinating is they also showed a lot of non-enjoyment smiles interspersed with the anger. And I'm sure you all are familiar with that distinction, with whether, smiles have involvement of orbicularis oculi, not just zygomatic major, action unit 12, right? For those of you who know facts. So previous research had shown that enjoyment smiles involve the eyes as well. Non-enjoyment smiles that just with 12 or zygomatic activity can occur for any number of reasons. Sometimes people are masking negative affect. Sometimes they're being polite. Sometimes it's a mild positive emotion. It's not always, a deception or a negative feeling. Emotional. Right, but it's a very mixed category when those occur. So what was interesting was, if you looked at what was really happening emotionally, there was like a combination of these anger expressions, non-enjoyment smiles, seem to differentiate the people who showed ischemia versus those who didn't. Now, that was that wasn't my first study with facts, but that was my dissertation. And one of my earlier, I had done some work on how facial expression and other elements of the emotional response came together when people were feeling emotions, whether they were disparate or connected, what we call response coherence, which was very basic emotion research. So early in my academic career, I was doing a lot of basic research. I continued one other study on personality and heart disease, and then basically looked at people's understanding of facial expressions of emotion, what factors went into that. I did, in not too long ago, but now about, I think it was published in 2017, early, but the work was done really in the earlier 2000s of a major collaborative project I was involved in on meditation with my colleagues at UC Davis, Clifford Saron, being the major coordinator of this huge project on the effects of intensive meditation training on cognitive, emotional, neurophysiological functioning. And I was in charge of the emotion piece of that. And we did some really interesting work looking at emotional behavior and in the laboratory and how people responded before and after intensive meditation training. So this was like a 3-month retreat where they were meditating like 6 hours a day. And some of it was
6 hours a day?
They were residential. They went to go live at this retreat. People do this, people who are deeply training. And we wanted to see what, the ancient wisdom says it's going to shift how you engage with people. If you practice compassion, it's going to have an impact on how you connect to images of suffering and things like that. So we did a laboratory study, and there were all kinds of tasks. The emotion piece was just one branch of the study. But one of the interesting things that we found is compared to controls, who also went through the pre-post design, those who went through the training, there was a shift in how they emotionally, basically mostly indicated by the face and also subjective ratings, changed how they respond to suffering in others. When they saw images, and they were viewing images from real documentary footage, not Hollywood films. This was real footage from the Iraq War, seeing effects of bombing from the Iraq War, and there's other images of, this is in a follow-up study, people in Rwanda during the occupation there and the genocide that was happening there. So there was images of suffering, actually people hurt and crying, but there was also, especially in the Iraq War footage, images of people who were perpetuating the damage. So like the soldiers, the American soldiers who went in and bombed, and seeing them get all excited about going in with their military action. And what was really interesting is not only did we see a shift in how the people in the study, the participants, responded to the suffering of the victims, if you will. There was more sadness, more of a sympathetic kind of sadness, in response to the suffering than the people who were the control group, who didn't have the training. But what's even really interesting was they had less contempt and anger toward the soldiers. So the typical response that you might see is those horrible people, they killed all the the innocent civilians,
or contempt.
Right. But with more contempt and disgust and anger, we called these rejection emotions. But the people who, things that was like, they're not me, right? They're different people. The people who had gone through the training were showing less of this, and they were less likely to see the soldiers as, less likely to dismiss them, shall we say. And that was a really important finding, because that was something, for me, that was very satisfying, because one of the things you learn when you're working with compassion is the importance of having not just compassion for, those who are the most obvious recipients of it, those who are hurting, but also those who are misguided, or those who are, what kind of suffering leads to, being set up to go kill people, as part of your day, what must that be like? Or even the ignorance of these very young soldiers not really realizing what they're doing. In fact, before we did this study, we were actually fortunate enough to be involved with some of the Mind and Life Institute meetings where the Dalai Lama had been in discussion with some of the researchers, and he actually saw some of the films that we ended up using. And he was the one who said, you know who needs the compassion most in this? The soldiers. These are the ones who need the compassion the most. So it was really interesting. I've digressed, but it's an interesting story. And that's some of the ways, I mean, I've used facts in research. I've also, in training, you know, I started using facts because of my research, and I learned it when I was a graduate student working with Paul Ekman. But what this led to, especially, was by around the turn of the century, around 2000, 2001, I left the University of Delaware, and I was at the College of William and Mary in Virginia, and I came back to California to actually come back to family. My father was ill and dying, and I was pregnant with my second son, and I just left that great academic job with my husband, and I both had academic jobs, my ex-husband, but my husband at the time, and came back to California, and I was kind of starting over in some ways, doing academic research, but, you know, not in a full-time faculty position. And I started getting opportunities to do consulting based on my facts expertise, because I'd been already working with it then for about 5 or 6 years, and people wanted, no, I've been working with it since 88, no, by then more than that. And people wanted coding, people were beginning, especially the group at Pittsburgh, were beginning to create these systems for automating facial coding, and they needed some of it vetted. My colleague Jeffrey Cohn there was one of the first people who asked me to do some expert coding to test their machine learning, you know, their automatic detection programs. And so I started doing that, and it was sort of that kind of work that led to the training option, and it was actually a large-scale project on deception that Mark Frank and Paul Ekman were doing at the time. And this is when Paul Ekman was, I mean, not Paul, Mark Frank was at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And he had a big grant for one of their collaborative deception studies, and they needed a lot of fax coders trained quickly. So that he was actually the first one to say, he and Paul said, do you think you could do like an immersive training in fax in person for some people so that we could get them trained fast? So that was the first experiment in a workshop, and that was 2004. And then I've been doing those for years, and I do them on. The pandemic finally kicked me in the butt to do it online. I'd had people asking me for years to do it online. So now I'm in my third online workshop. It's completely different. You can't do it for 5 days online. No one wants to sit in front of a computer for an entire day for 5 days in a row. But I do it over more like a course over like 9 sessions. We do that. It's working really well. So I do that. I do the training too. So I have research, training, and then there was the Lie to Me phase, which was super fun. The show Lie to Me, for those of you. I'm sure you know about it, right? Do you all know about it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was just a delightful little journey. I was a consultant and a scientific consultant on that show for its entire run. I was very lucky to be involved. Do you know the story of how I got into that? Did you ever hear me talk about that? I did on a couple. Well,
no, please share.
Yeah, okay, so it was summer of 2008, and I got an email from Paul, and you asked me in one of these questions you sent me what I'll tell you what Paul is to me. He's a mentor, he's a friend, he's you know, been in my life for years. We're having lunch next week, and you know, I mean, he's like family. Yeah. But it was summer 2008, and I got an email from Paul. I had not heard anything about the show. Apparently he was working on it with somebody, Sam, what was Sam's last name? I forgot Sam's last name. The creator of the show had read an article about Paul Ekman's work in the New Yorker. There was an article in the periodical, the New Yorker, by Malcolm Gladwell, actually, or maybe it was New York Times. It might have been the New York Times. And he read the article, and he thought it'd make a great story, that the drama, that there's somebody based on Ekman's life who was a, facial expression expert who had who did research in deception, and he left academia. Now this part is not true, that he created a company. Well, Ekman did create a company, but it was nothing like the Lightman Group. Cal Lightman was the character on Lie to Me, where he had a, he took cases to help people figure out if someone was lying. Paul never did that. He did consulting here and there on special projects, but he never did what Cal Lightman did. But anyway, they created this character. I didn't know anything about the sitcom, not the sitcom, it was a drama, the show or the plans for the show, but it was summer of 2008. I received an email from Paul that said, Marianne, that was his wife's name. Marianne and I are going out of town for our anniversary, and I'm needed in LA for the pilot for this show. Can you go instead? I had no idea what he was talking about. He said they need a face expert on set. I said, okay. And I'm sitting like, okay, flying to LA from this area is like, a 1 hour flight, and I get to go be on a TV set and talk about the face. Okay. So I went down there, and I was there for the shooting of the pilot, and which was totally unglamorous in some big warehouse outside of Los Angeles. It was a hot day. And, but I remember I met Tim Roth right away. And, we talked about Obama for a while, because this was during the Obama campaign. And I gave advice on the set, but the main, that was really fun. But most of the work that we did, after that session, it was never planned in advance that I'd be a part of it. But after I went down, they said, oh, great, we want you to advise us, So then Paul and I both advised on the show, and we got every script, and we went through the script and gave comment about, their use of facial expression. And I don't know if you recall, they would often show pictures of celebrities or other people making faces. So we would advise them on that. And it was fun. It was really fun. And that was my, 15 minutes of fame, as Andy Warhol calls it. I got to be part of a television show. It was on for 3 years. It was a really unexpected application of facts. And I have more, but I'll stop talking. I could just keep talking.
Just one question quickly. After the show, the TV show Lie to Me, do you think that facts became pop?
It definitely became much more popular, and it was a little challenging for those of us who were actually doing the rigorous work in the field, because what happened was it created this whole level of interest of people who wanted to know about it for, like, let's say they were in business or, working with human resources, and they wanted to get a sense of anybody they interviewed, whether that was an issue. I got to put my glasses back on to see you better. All these people wanting to use it for interpersonal relationships, and can I judge if somebody is lying? Because one of the things that they did in the show that was not accurate was portray Cal Lightman, the character supposedly based on Paul Ekman, as someone who could walk around and always tell in a moment if someone's lying. Now, most of that work is done with video analysis, frame by frame in real life. If you have a lot of experience, you can be pretty good in real time at getting a sense that they are, but then you need more evidence. So they took liberties and in fact, when the show was on, Paul Ekman actually had a blog called The Truth About Lie to Me, where it was an agreement he had with the studios that he would be able to say, this part of it's true, this is not really accurate. I mean, about 90% of the science they used in the show was accurate, but they took artistic license, shall we say. So it did bring out of the woodwork a lot of people who suddenly wanted to become lie detectors. There were people who wanted to have a career like Cal Lightman. So in a way, it was, a boost for facts training, but I had to do a lot of work to filter out people who really didn't want to learn. They thought they wanted to learn this. I said, this is not deception detection. This is about, describing facial movement. That's all facts is. What you do with it later is up to you. You can look at it in terms of emotion. You can use facts to drive virtual humans, which is another huge application, another thing, and I'll just mention that briefly. That's another line of work that's been a big part of my career over the past decade or so, is Actually, it's the first time I did anything with it was when I was invited to give a talk in 2004. So it started a long time ago, but people in the digital arts have been interested in facts and using facts more and more in creating, I had worked with facts to describe faces, to try to decipher what's happening in the face, to understand maybe what someone's either trying to communicate or what they're feeling. But in the digital arts, they were interested in using facts, provided a language for describing facial movement that they could use to drive faces that they created. So the idea was, can we create, use the knowledge from facts to create digital effects, either digital humans for, at first encountered it in people using digital virtual humans for applied trainings and tutors, but then it, went into entertainment really quickly with all the, CGI and animation. So there over the years, at first it was very appealing to that people in that field to see the facts manual, find it, and then say, oh, we have a language to talk about movements. And only more recently have people actually brought that into what we might call using facts to drive a face. Can you create something, a digital tool that makes facial movements that's dictated by the facial action codes? And the work I do with the company Humane in the UK, I've been involved with them for a while, is we create digital effects, digital humans driven by facts, action units. And I've consulted with and trained a lot of other digital arts companies, video game companies, film effects. That's another, I never thought that was something, even Ekman, if you look at the most recent copy of What the Face Reveals that just came out last year, I mentioned this in the introduction. We never anticipated that application of facts, but it's become huge, really, really big.
I mean, the application of facts is so much big. I mean, I see doctors using, psychologists, judges, agents of law. So that's so much people application the facts that I believe that was one of the most biggest studies in the last years, I mean, decades.
Yeah, I'd have to say that it was a major development in behavioral sciences that's had of the 20th century. And I think that its impact in terms of how it's had an effect on the world is much bigger than we ever thought, both because it was originally designed to be a research tool, which is what I tell people, when I give talks to people in the digital arts, I let them know it was not created for what you're using it for. So you have to understand that, because there's some that has what facts was created for. It does have an impact in how it was, how it was created. Right. Describes things. Yeah. And so it was described for the behavioral science, developed for the behavioral sciences, and quite literally Ekman and Friesen created it because they needed it. They had been studying people's recognition of emotion cross-culturally. They found evidence for some set of consistent universal expressions, a small set, the basic emotions, anger, fear, disgust, happiness, sadness, surprise. And even though there's a huge amount of variability across different parts of the world and different cultures, there's also some things that are the same. And it was on the basis of finding those consistencies that Ekman and Friesen decided to create that led them to believe, well, then we can look to the face for information about emotion. It was really an interest in emotion that drove the development of facts. But their first attempts, which were more emotion expression measurement tools, they had something called FAST that came out before facts, which was the facial affect scoring technique. That's what FAST was. So that was similar to some other approaches that developed, like those of Carol Izard's, that used like templates where you looked for certain, like, this expression means anger, that one means happiness. So you're looking for certain expressions to occur rather than, this was before action units, right? So they were doing this, and then they realized they were missing something. In fact, it was Silvan Tomkins, who you must have heard Paul mention at some point, and I've talked about, who collaborated on the FAST. Tomkins was a mentor to Paul Ekman. He was also a mentor to Carol Lazard, who was a contemporary of Paul's for still many years. And Paul tells me this story where he was in a bar with Silvan Tomkins, and they were talking about their emotion measurement fast or whatever approach to facial expression measurement they were using. And Tomkins pointed to someone at the end of the bar who was doing something that looked like contempt, kind of like that. And he said, "So what does your system call that?" And Paul's like, "We didn't think of that one ahead of time." And that's when he realized you can't know everything. You can't think of everything ahead of time, right? How we could miss so many other important things. So they decided the only way to do this right is to measure everything the face can do. That's why they developed FACS. And it took them 8 years to do it. It was a really painstaking process. And, they realized we can't say what things mean. We can't say this is anger, whatever. We just have to say this part of the brows did this, the cheeks did that, the lip corners did this. And so that's where that's how FACS was developed. And they also, I'm going to look something up real quick. I know you're, so what's his name? There was, in the they actually built on, and not everybody knows this, it's very important to mention this researcher, Hjortso, and they cite him in the original FACS manual. Hjortso is cited, was the first one who came up with some of this numbering system for different regions of the face. But Ekman and Friesen built on that and expanded it to all the action units and defined what an action unit was as the visible manifestation of the underlying muscles contracting. So for anybody watching this who doesn't know FACS, FACS is based on, the elemental unit is the AU or action unit. And action unit is the what you see on the outside when certain muscles move. So if I, lift, if I wrinkle the nose, there's a few different muscles, levator labii superioris, aqua nasi, and that contract to make action unit 9, which wrinkles the nose. So every outside manifestation of a muscle contraction, it has an action unit designation, and we can describe all observable facial movement on the basis of the action units that comprise it. As I'm just saying this for the audience, I know you folks here know that, but that was huge because it made facial measurement more objective. It wasn't, I think that's anger, or I think that's sadness, or because so many of these systems were really vague. What is a smile? What is a frown? A frown, is this a frown? Is this a frown? It's not specific enough. So they took sort of meaning out of it and just made it totally descriptive.
Sure. Very interesting, Erika. I have a question about one of the things you mentioned, one of the topics. It was about deception detection. And how is your view today about today's research on that topic, on interview techniques and cognitive overload, etc., etc.?
So if you're asking just a general question about whether FACS should be used in that way, or what I can say, what do you want me to,
it can apply too, but your view has a whole.
What do you think about?
What do I think about it?
Sure.
I think that paying attention to nonverbal behavior is really important in trying to determine if someone is concealing something. And, so deception, concealment, they're not being truthful in what they share. But anybody who's gotten into this work at all knows that that deception detection determining whether someone is being deceptive is a very complicated process. It's not like there is a facial expression of deception. And what we know from largely from research is that and from when you talk to people who do this in their work, practical experience, that, but we know a lot of this from research, and some of it done by Paul Ekman and Mark Frank, and, that detecting deception involves looking at a number of different measures. And what you're trying to find out is whether things, looking at congruity and incongruity is really important. That is, does the face agree with what the words are saying? So if someone is saying, they're asked how they feel about what happened to somebody, or, are you feeling okay right now? Oh, yes, I'm just fine. So I say I'm fine, but my brow is looking a little distressed, right? So that doesn't fit, and when I've trained interrogators, it's like you're looking at the face as, and the voice, because one of the things we know that the nonverbal channels, the vocal channel being one of the most powerful ones. So I'm not talking about the words, but what the voice does. So whether there's an increase in pitch, it goes up higher, when people are more likely to be saying something that's not truthful. The amplitude or the volume goes down, so they fade off, get quieter. There's quiver. There's all these vocal characteristics that have been mapped to be common when people are actually lying. And there's also the issue of whether the face and the words agree. So like I said, are you feeling okay? Oh yeah, I'm feeling fine. I say that I'm feeling fine, but my brow is not fine. Now, does that mean that I'm lying? No. And what I tell interrogators is that what you wanted, that's a red flag, meaning that's something that you want to come back to. You don't want to bring it up right at that moment. You don't want to say, what just happened on your forehead? But instead you want to make a note of that and come back and probe more deeply at that, or in the moment, probe more deeply there, get more information, so that the face and voice can be cues that something might not be right, and you got to get more information. So I think what I would say is anything that feels like an easy trick for deception detection is probably incomplete or wrong, and that it's a huge moral and ethical responsibility to be in the position of making decisions about people on that basis. It's not to be taken lightly, and especially in the practical application in real life contexts. So I think it's really important to know that the face is useful, very useful, because it's very powerful, but it must be considered in conjunction with the other indicators you have from what people are saying, the situation that they're in, because they could just be distressed about being asked about that, because maybe it's related to something else, not the fact that they're concealing that they, committed some crime or something else. So you do need to dig, but the face, it's harder to control the face than it is to control what you say, right? So the word that's used a lot in deception detection is leakage. And it's sort of like when something leaks, something seeping out that you don't intend to share. And you can leak facially, you can leak vocally, and there are things that people can do in their speech to deflect. You ask a question like, where were you the night of July 5th? Where was I on July 5th? That parroting, that's buying time to fabricate a story. There's all kinds of things that people do. And so learning how to bring that whole suite of measures together, if you will, many resources need to be consulted in deception detection.
Did you read about the scanner? 6-channel analysis real time?
I'm not, can you, what is that I don't know exactly what you're talking about. And maybe
it's a protocol about the 6-channel analysis.
Can you type that down for me? Can you put that? I'm not sure. I'm what is it?
The English Intelligence Academy.
I don't know what that is. Yeah.
They use the effects in the facial channel for measuring facial expression,
Facial
obviously.
expressions.
And I mean, they work with, I don't know,
Oh, right.
with pins, pins. It's about
Points of
the
interest.
clue, a clue of, I mean, if an expression is not symmetrical, and there's
Oh,
an
right.
evidence of use the light detection.
Yeah.
But I mean, is what you say about it. I believe that's more like a investigative method of the communication.
I just looked that up. I see that's something that the Emotional Intelligence Academy.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Cliff
And
Lansing.
they're the folks, right? And those are folks who are involved with the Paul Ekman International, and they do trainings for like evaluating truthfulness and emotional skills internationally. But excuse me, I'm turning off the heater back here. It's getting too warm. Anyway, I'm actually not familiar with the product. I mean, it sounds like it's a system for automatically doing it. When I look at it online, I don't know how much research has been done with it. There was a publication in 2017. So I'll have to get back to you on my opinion on that once I've read some things. So, because it's definitely a reputable group who's involved in it, but I just don't know. Currently, haven't read that paper. There's a couple papers. I'm a little I haven't seen much of it, though. That's been done outside their group, and so always I have to do more research. But I'd be curious how much has been done since since it was rolled out. What practical applications have been done? Maybe you're more familiar with it than I am. I don't see many publications.
Have not some publications.
It doesn't have many
4
articles on that.
maybe, and all for the Emotional Intelligence Academy.
Okay.
So, I mean, exists, but I don't see so much more research about it.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't really want to make a statement on something I haven't evaluated. I try to be careful that way. But thank you for bringing it to my attention. I was not aware of it. Yeah. Even though I do a lot of, I do some teaching and writing and, training of people that has involved deception. Most of my work is on, with training is on facial measurement itself. I try to be more specialized that way. And I think that is, so I'm not familiar with that particular tool. I'll take a look at it, but thank you. I opened a publication just now and I'll read it later. I'm not going to try to cram it in while we talk because that wouldn't be giving you my full attention. So
Thank you.
Well,
And Erika, can you talk more about your point of view of a little, how can I say, a little debate, let's say like that, between Paul Ekman and his work and Lisa Feldman and his work? I saw he has one post on his own website about that. We read it. We can link on for our audience, but I would like to see your own point of view. What can you say? What do you think about that?
it's been going on for a very long time, and it's kind of did you see my AU20 when I said that?
Sure.
And actually this debate has old origins, right? Because in the 1990s, Paul and Jim Russell would have these debates. When I was a grad student, very contentious debates about, whether there was some sort of, really what meaning is in the face, and whether the face has intrinsic meaning or it's driven by context. And in a way, this really comes out of huge, somewhat opposing or conflicting tensions in Western thinking and psychology general between nature and nurture, quite frankly. I mean, it goes back to, is there something that we're born with versus is it learned? Is it ultimately very malleable to cultural context? And Ekman's position has been it's both. And one of the things that's been frustrating, I mean, if you look back to the 1970s, he talked about neurocultural theory, which was basically that there were some things that were consistent in humans, and now that we've had so much cross-species work, I mean, one of my favorite things that's been happening with facts the past couple decades has been the amazing applications to animals. And by getting connected to those people, I've realized how much similarity there is actually in at least the facial musculature, even though it looks different, there's a whole bunch of similarity. Anyway, this goes way back to tensions about what's inborn and what's learned. So just to say that is an ancient tension is in Western. Sure. So there's that. And then in the 90s, there was the debate between Russell and Ekman. And then Lisa Feldman Barrett, who I know was either a colleague or had done some studying with Jim Russell. They were just very aligned in the 90s when she's about my age. So she was a graduate student around the time I was, but not we weren't at the same university, but we're contemporaries. Somehow this has become a big part of her life's work, is trying to just basically, it seems to me, show that there's no intrinsic meaning in facial expression, that there's no meaning in facial expression, and that it's very malleable, and that the best way to understand it is degrees of arousal and pleasure.
Negative and a positive.
Yeah. That's about the most that you can get. And I will say she's done, an enormous amount of, research, and she's gotten into neuroscience. She started doing that about 20 years ago. She shifted into more of a neuroscience perspective. I don't really want to, I think one of the things that I can say, I don't want to get too political because it's a contentious area, but what I would like to say is it feels to me like, I don't want to say a waste of time, but I did.
Sure.
Just now, not a waste of time, but it's like, I think that it's long seemed that both of these perspectives, there definitely is a huge amount of variation, and the facial expression can be moved around and manipulated. It's not, it doesn't completely exist devoid of context and devoid of other sources of information. And she basically has gotten to an extreme point of saying there's no intrinsic information about emotion in the face. And you can argue the data, and I think there's strong data to indicate that that's not true. Especially Dr. Keltner recently has come out with these studies showing evidence for a certain way of looking at enormous amount of consistency in recognizing facial expressions across, dozens of cultures. He's really expanded that universality base, and you can have there's always been consistency and disagreement. There's never been like it's 100% in the face. But, all I have to do, quite frankly, if you've interacted with humans from all over the world, there are things that people just understand from the face, right? Sure. So to say that there's nothing there I don't get it. I just don't get it. And I don't understand. It seems to be, to me, elevated or descended to the level of some personal issue of wanting to basically, undermine everything Ekman's done. I don't know. And I'm being really honest here. So I agree that there's, definitely a strength to some of the things that she's saying. I don't want to get into it. I really don't. It's a contentious area. I don't want to polarize further, but I feel like it's sort of missing the boat. That I don't think there's value in trying to say that there's nothing valuable, that there's nothing intrinsic in the face, because that just doesn't seem to be true, and there's also what was I going to say about this? Give me a second. There was something I was going to share. Another whole thing that's come up is, unfortunately, this issue has come up. Like, her work has been referred to in a way that doesn't seem accurate in the people who are, there's this whole other thing that's come up about facial detection and issues of ethics of whether you should, and unfortunately facts has gotten into that because a lot of people doing the research on doing automatic detection of faces have drawn from facts. And this has been used to profile, you've heard of its use in profiling. And unfortunately, the errors and the misapplication of that has been kind of confounded with her argument, which is sort of a different point about there being no intrinsic emotional meaning in the face. And the issues that are like problematic with those automatic detection programs is, first of all, some of the time they're not talking about emotion, they're talking about identity. And identity is a different issue. Like, who is this? If I do a quick scan, can I determine who that is? That's not an emotion question at all. So the emotion issue is not relevant. And the other problem is a lot of those automatic programs are have huge flaws in them. That there's a whole lot of error in how they do detection of the AUs. And once they do detection of the AUs, the algorithms they use to try to put them into emotion categories, there's, huge liberties that are taken, and they're not as good when you have complex combinations like this. I'm doing a 12 and a 15. Right? So do these scanners catch both? They'll get the 15 because in a tug of war between 12 and 15, 15 usually wins for the lip corners, but the cheeks, if I do a 15 without a 12, but if I add a 12, you can see the 12 there in terms of how it's lifting obliquely on the cheeks, and that might not get caught, and that's a complex feeling, and there's all these nuances about what that might mean. Are they controlling the smile? Is a feeling of poignant, bittersweet emotion? There's a lot of different ways to interpret 12 and 15. So anyway, I've digressed quite a long way. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I guess my feeling
Sure.
There's some good science there. It's healthy debate. I think there's truth on both sides, but I feel that this extreme view of there really being no intrinsic information about emotion in the face or in facial behaviors, not just faces per se, I think that's wrong. And based on data and my experience.
Sure. Thank you, Erika.
I have a question. People. Just a moment. Sorry, my English by Joel Santana. I will read. Erika, will there be a new version of the facts manual?
Working on it right now.
Sorry.
Working on it right now, and I know it's I got the okay from Ekman to start it shortly before the pandemic hit, and then the pandemic hit, and that changed everything. But I've been working on it. I mean, it's a labor of love. No one's paying me to do this, so it's my goal has first been to correct the errors, and there are a number of errors that this revision. The main thing is going to be correcting the errors, reorganizing it a little bit to make it more accessible, because there's a lot of information that when you're first learning the AUs would be better as an appendix or a supplement, certain things at the end. So reorganize it for clarity of learning. But the biggest issue is improving the images in the film, in the videos. For anybody who's worked with it, I mean, the images, actually, the photographs are great. They're old, they're black and white, they're great resolution. Those don't need to be changed, but we do need to increase have better quality video, and we're going to be doing that with actual video, plus also some digital human heads, which will allow us to look at the face actions from a bunch of different angles and things like that. We're going to increase the variability in the people we see from different parts of the world and different ethnic backgrounds, different gender orientation and ages. So we're going to try to make the things that people are seeing for coding practice be much more representative of humans than just these few people who were in Paul's lab at the time.
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah, but it's going to be, we're right now trying to get a little additional funding. There's a small team of us working on this slowly, but and there are going to be, it's not clear whether we're going to have just a manual or a more virtual way of engaging with it, So I think there's a lot of opportunities for more dynamic learning. So there will still be a manual. There will always be a manual, but then we'll have, I don't know. We're developing some things. I'll leave it at that. But yes, we're working on it. Mainly me, and I have a couple. I'm consulting with some of my fellow fax colleagues for input whenever they can, and we're definitely going to do a lot of expert coding from independent people when it comes to the practice items, and developing the digital resources. So it's coming, we promise. But that's another important point to make, and especially for your audience, and the Portuguese speaking audience, is that the last official fax manual to come out that was approved by Ekman was the one in 2002. And I know that there's others who have published translations like called Fax 3 or whatever and put pictures of Paul Ekman in it. He did not endorse it. He actually asked them to stop doing this, but it's out there, so just so you know, it's not been approved.
Sure.
People can do what they want, but I just need to say that.
Sure, thank you for saying that.
I see we only have a couple minutes left because I do have something coming up.
So exists the possibility of we have a Portuguese version, official version of the fax?
If you can have what? A Portuguese version? First of all, let me just say this. I am totally supportive of translation into as many languages as possible. And there were issues with the previous manual of getting Ekman and Friesen and everybody on board with translations. And now I think we need them translated into, people are going to use it. It's very difficult to learn it in a different language, So I think we can't take responsibility for doing all the translations, but we're happy to, to consider collaborations or approving other translations, because I think I don't understand why not. I think it's the way it should be. I understand why other things develop in other, I mentioned that other version wasn't approved, but I also understand what happens, why people want to have versions in their native language to work with. So I can at least understand why people might go on and want to do that. The thing that concerned me was the presenting it as something that's been endorsed when it hasn't. That was the issue, but I'm totally in support of translation. Yeah. So we'll see so you can follow up on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And translation's a difficult process because you have to really translate and back translate. That's the way you make sure that it was done accurately. And fax is not just regular English. We know it's terminology, and there's a lot of Latin in there. When you get
muscles,
the muscle names are universal. They should be. They're in Latin, and they should stay in Latin.
Sure. Yeah. Erika, how much will it cost?
Oh, I don't know.
The manual.
I would just say that money's not the issue here. I would like it to be I would love it if we could just give it away. But there probably will be. I can't say. I didn't say that right now. It's actually not my position because I'm not. It's not just me and Paul. Ekman is still the senior author, and it's I'm going to be added on to the end. But I would like to see that there be versions at least that are really. There might be different ways you get it. There could be the basic version versus more elaborate version. I would like to see it to be as affordable as possible. I would love it if there could be a version that we had were basically free. But it's just we're too soon on that. So don't quote me as saying but you can quote me on saying that my goal is that it be accessible and affordable to whoever wants it. Yeah, which is that's a slightly different focus from before. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. One more question.
Marcelo,
go ahead.
Do you have a question?
No more questions.
Okay. Okay.
No questions to you.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having.
Thank you so much for your attention, Erika, for providing a little of your time with us. You surely helped us a lot, and will help clarify a lot of our followers, and you bring a lot of very interesting topics about the whole cardiac. I forgot the term, ischemia.
Yeah, that was
whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was very interesting, along with all the other topics you mentioned. It was a very enriching conversation, and I personally loved the whole experience.
Well, it was really nice.
All of us, actually.
All of us.
Yeah. And thank you for having me. And send me a link to whatever you do with this. I'd like to see the final product.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erika.
Bye.
Então, galera, você que assistiu esse podcast, se inscreva nesse canal, fique de olho em tudo que a gente posta, compartilhe com seus amigos, principalmente, vamos jogar esse papo que a gente tem aqui sobre comportamento não verbal lá para cima. Então, compartilha, dá o like e só bora!
E não se esqueça de clicar no sininho para ativar as notificações e não perder uma novidade do podcast mais brabo desse Brasil.
É isso aí, pessoal. Valeu!
Valeu!